This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by OWC, Spectra 1964, Sampley, Isotope, SonarWorks, and API. In fact, you're hearing my voice right now on the Spectra 1964 STX 100 mic pre in an API lunchbox mixed carefully through Isotope RX and Ozone, all recorded safely onto an OWC SSD. So get ready to rock.
You know, it's just like you go into somebody else's studio and you don't know how they have things routed, you know? It's very personal, and that's one of the things I love about synthesizers is that there are an infinite number of ways that you can play them and approach them and make music with them, and none of it's bad or wrong. It's like, it's all, if you're having fun and you're getting enjoyment out of it, then it's worthwhile.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. You've already invested in your speakers, headphones, and the sound treatment of your studio. So you're ready to make great music, but your mixes don't seem to translate to the rest of the world when they leave the studio. The problem is that the frequency response of your room is not allowing your speakers to tell you the whole story. SonarWorks Sound ID Reference can solve this for you by calibrating your speakers and headphones EQ and balance so that you can now make better mix choices. Start with a 21-day free trial at sonarworks.com. The API Select T12 is a classic two-channel FET feedback-style compressor limiter with a Class A tube output stage and custom API transformer, allowing split mono or stereo mode. Built with dual triode vacuum tubes, sidechain de-essing, detent controls for accurate recall, and API's famous thrust mode, the T12 represents a new design in tube compression. Bring the legendary sound of API to your home studio with the new Select T12 at apiaudio.com. Hey Rockstars, it's your host Lid Shaw, and welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Matt Baxley, better known to the wider world as Moot Booxlé, a multi-instrumentalist, singer, producer, composer, synthesist, teacher, and funk connoisseur, currently based in Fort Myers, Florida. Moot rose to prominence in the early days of YouTube with his videos demonstrating his abilities on the modular synthesizer and the talkbox, gaining millions of views and many followers. He played his first professional gig at age 16, playing drums in a production of the musical Grease in his hometown of Morristown, Tennessee. Moot is a Tennessee boy like myself, although he's living in Florida now. He has played thousands of gigs since then on multiple instruments. He currently plays and sings nightly in several bands in Southwest Florida, producing records, playing on studio sessions, demonstrating musical equipment, both live and on the internet, and writing books. I stumbled on Moots YouTube channel just recently, actually, surfing synth videos, which is my new hobby as my closet DJ emerges. When I was checking out the new line of Behringer synths, like the Poly D, Odyssey, MS-101, Crave, and Pro 1, I myself got a DeepMind 12 as a birthday gift, and all of a sudden I'm hooked on synths, and I still don't know what to do with them. Moot does a great job of demoing all these on his channel, so definitely check that out. We'll have links in the show notes. Moot also live streams from his studio occasionally, and you can kind of see walls of super cool new and vintage synths going back to the 80s and 70s and stuff like that all over. And he plays with a great deal of funky skill. Plus, like I said, he's from Tennessee, so come on, he's got to be on the show. Please welcome Moot Booxlé to Recording Studio Rockstars. Moot, are you ready to rock, my brother?
I'm ready to rock. I'm so happy to be here, man.
Dude, it's great to have you here, man. I really did, just like I'd never seen anything of yours, and all of a sudden I stumbled on your stuff, and I was like, this dude is just super cool. You seem like the nicest guy on YouTube.
Well, I appreciate that you saying that, and I'm glad that that is that translates over YouTube, because I try to keep it friendly.
Right on, man. Well, I also appreciate the fact that you've been in Florida. Like, I think at this point, have you been down in South Florida longer than you were in Tennessee?
No, I moved to Florida when I was 21.
Okay.
I'm 38 now, so yeah. Since 2004, I've been here.
Well, I love that you haven't ditched, the sound of your voice sounding like you may have originated up here.
Yeah, that's it comes and goes, and especially if I when I go home and visit my family for a while, like I'll be talking just like that for a week.
Awesome. Well, Roxelle, I will reiterate that one of the things that got me really excited about having Moot on the show was your vast knowledge of synthesizers, your great ability to demo them on YouTube, and the fact that when you were demoing them, you're playing like a badass while you're playing. So I was like, who is this dude? So
thank you, man.
Yeah, Moot, tell us a little bit more about who you are in your own words. Give us the kind of brief introduction to how, you went from playing drums at 16, which, by the way, little quick backstory. I just moved it out of my studio, but at the moment I still own and I'm getting ready to find a new home for a recording console that originated at Criteria Studio C in Miami, where it recorded the soundtrack to Grease. So the very drum parts that you've been playing were all recorded on my console at one point.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah. So tell us,
so much great stuff made.
Yeah, thank you. Tell us how you started out from there and found yourself down in Fort Myers.
Okay, well, I guess briefly. So I was born into a somewhat musical family. My mother plays piano and sings, and a lot of her family play instruments. My mom's dad was multi-instrumentalist, and so I kind of grew up around music. There was always a piano in the house, and I got my first turntable when I was 2, and I was glued to it. Like I by the time I was 5 or 6, I had a shelf full of records and just totally just obsessed with music from day one.
So did you have a second turntable and a microphone?
That's where it's at.
That's right. All right.
Yeah.
We're on the same page.
I did have a second turntable.
Right on.
And I think I had one of those play microphones with the little spring in it, so like a Mr. Microphone. Yeah. But yeah, anyway, it started off, tinkering around, watching the Monkees reruns on TV, sitting in front of the TV with my little toy piano. Just, I was like absorbed in it from the beginning. And so I guess my start playing professionally, if you want to call it that. I suppose, the definition of professional is different to different people. I guess
it's a podcast.
It's
you can make up the truth, man. You can just, whatever you say becomes what is, right?
Yeah. If it's a paying gig, I figure that's a pro gig, whether you consider yourself a pro or not. I didn't consider myself a pro at 16, but they thought I was good enough and I could read good enough to play in, orchestra pit.
That's impressive.
Yeah, and that was really, thanks to my some great mentors in my life. My friend Chris Sotelo and his wife Kathy. She was my 8th grade band teacher, and her husband was just a brilliant guy. Had a studio in his house. Did everything on analog tape. Had all these Moog synthesizers and Rhodes pianos, and so they invited me over when I was like 14, and it was like a life-changing thing. It was like, that's when I knew that's what I wanted to do. And Chris, sort of gave me my whole first education in like formal education in recording and all of, MIDI, all of that stuff. And he passed last year of a heart attack. And
sorry.
I was really, really depressed for a long time. And but that's grief, there's a process. And I'm thankful, because even as he left this mortal coil, he had willed me all of his studio equipment. So last year I went up and And we came back to my house with a truckload of, I had a Rhodes Mark V and a Roland Juno 6 and a clavinet and a bunch of guitars and Fender Princeton, and, a bunch of cool stuff. And it's all been employed as much as possible. And I'm glad that these things are still continuing to be used. And it's a great legacy, because this guy really did give me my start in everything that I do now for a living. And what's cool is like the 4-track recorder. So my thing is, ironically, we're on a recording studio podcast, and I work in a commercial studio, plus I have a studio in my house. So, I mean, fidelity is a thing, but as far as my own work, I tend to go for a lo-fi or mid-fi sound. Like, I really...
You do a cool thing on your records.
I appreciate that. Yeah. So like these last 2 albums, like I just put out a new one today. It's called ADD. And that's like the sparse code, like not like the...
Right. Analog, digital.
Yeah. Because, I just thought, people who came from that era and saw that on CDs and stuff, that'll ring a bell. And that's really indicative of what's going on with the music. Like, it all came through a digital Tascam DM4800 console as I played it all live. So I have this setup at home where there'll be, I've got analog synths, electromechanical keyboards. There's a Hammond, Clav, 2 Rhodes, and Wurlitzer. This all in this kind of like this little surrounding thing. Like just the typical synth nest that people build. But it's kind of like a big combination of modern and vintage, and it's mostly analog in that main room. But everything's tied to, if I don't have enough inputs, there's sub mixers for things, and everything is deeply integrated with MIDI routing. So like I have like MIDI to trigger converters and stuff. So like even anything that's analog, I can still sync it. So I hit play in Logic, and my looper and all my sequencers and everything are like synced. And so I'll typically just use Logic when I'm making these types of records. I'm not even recording into a DAW. I'm recording onto this 4-track that was Chris's 4-track that he started with in the 80s.
Oh, cool. Is it a reel-to-reel 4-track or a cassette?
It's a cassette. It's a Yamaha MT100. It's like the most basic of Yamaha. It's like has no EQs or anything.
I think I had one of those. It was a little black flat desktop thing, or is it the kind that had like... There was a 4-track maybe before that. I don't remember if it was Yamaha, where the cassette was up high, vertical, but then the faders and the mixers were sort of down low at an angle. It was a real console kind of look.
Oh, I've seen those. Is that a Tascam, or is that a Yamaha unit?
It might be a Tascam. Yeah, it might be.
That's a cool... I remember that look, though, and thinking, man, that looks neat.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. Yeah, so you got the 4-track to start out on.
Yeah, so I've had that thing. Like, he pretty much gave it to me, like, in 2003 or 2004, and I've made so much music on that. And so, are you familiar with a guy named Gabriel Roth? Up there at no. That's the Daptone Studios, Daptone Records.
Yeah.
I think they're like in Staten Island or somewhere. Anyway, like they're like very committed to a completely time warp aesthetic. Like everything, there's like everything's vintage. It completely vintage sound, and it's like I think that's a great approach of like, if you want a vintage sound, then just use 100% vintage equipment.
Yep. And the miking techniques are important. That's where I sort of learned about the one mic technique, that and from Al Evans up at Ironwax Studios.
Oh man, yeah, and it's amazing like how when you just place the mic like they placed it, and you kind of structure the gain like they did, you end up with a very vintage, authentic sound that's like, wow, this sounds like it could have been recorded 45, 50 years ago,
Yeah, and I feel like it's more than that, too. It's like it's the right kind of excitement for the music.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Oh, absolutely, because that, who cares about the recording technique if the spirit of the music isn't happening?
Right. Well, like when you do the one mic kind of thing or the really simplified miking on the drums and you get that sound right, it sort of translates the parts where you get what you're supposed to get out of the parts for the music. I don't think it would work for heavy metal very well, for example, but it works great for funk,
Right. So going back to this guy, Gabriel Roth, he wrote a series of articles that appeared in Tape Op in I don't know, this is going back a while. I think I read the article in 2010, but I don't know if it was new in 2010, but that doesn't really matter. The point is the article was called "Shitty is Pretty."
Nice.
And it was basically him just explaining how to misuse tape and miking techniques and stuff to make a very gritty vintage sound. And he went into some detail, enough detail that I was like, I could try this. And so I got out my trusty old $10 Radio Shack microphone and plugged it in and set it up kind of like what I thought he was explaining, and recorded it into my 4-track, and it was like and just slammed the turds out of it, just slammed the front end. And I discovered over all these years of experimentation with this, if you're really going for that oversaturated tape sound, you got to use low bias, the cheapest tape possible.
Which is nice because it's a little less expensive. Although now any tape is hard to find, so it's really, I don't know. Is it hard to find? Can you still find cassettes, like blank ones, or do you get into the reusing routine?
Well, I reuse them because I want to make them. I want to make it sound worse and worse. So, but yeah, you can, I recently bought a brick of high bias tapes, and that's the thing though, is using Type 2 high bias tapes. I used those Maxell XL2s for years, the gray ones, and those are great sounding tapes and they hold up well.
And the TDKs, wasn't that the other one?
Oh yeah, those TDKs, there was a few that were just really nice, and but the thing is they don't saturate as easily.
Right, because they were trying to make good sounding tape.
Right, which is not what I'm going for at all.
Yeah.
It's all the things that we tried to get rid of in music for decades, we're now trying to put back into music.
Right.
Because somehow we threw out the baby with the bathwater, I think.
Yeah.
In a certain sense, I feel like there's, well, I mean, when I work a completely different way, and I don't want to get off the track here because I do want to explain kind of this sort of analog process, but I work a completely different way when I'm just doing straight up digital recording, for a client or something. It's a completely different mindset, But as far as for my own stuff, it's about experimentation, and a lot of, they say limitations breed creativity, and I think that's so true, and that's been kind of the guiding principle for all these records that I made. So in 2011 or 12, I can't remember, 11, I think, I put out an EP called Bare Hands, and it was that was the beginning of this lo-fi thing.
BEAR?
Yeah, Bare Hands.
How about Alligator Hands, man? Down there on the edge of Alligator Alley. All right, sorry, I digress. I'm gonna interject a lot of stupid jokes. Just giving you heads up.
Good.
All right, cool.
That's fine. I just have a short attention span.
Right. That's why the next record is called ADD.
I mean, I thought, okay, well, look, depending on however you want to take that, it's sort of applicable,
right.
Because there's a lot of. So what I would do, to make. Okay, I'm getting ahead of myself again. So all of this 4-track stuff, this funk 4-track stuff, the Bare Hands, there's two of those EPs. Mm-hmm. And then there's one called Dirt that is basically trying to expand on the nasty sound even more. So basically Dirt was the same process of just using 1 or 2 mics and not expensive mics and pushing the tape really hard Except I ended up doing all this like weird post-processing to a lot of things, and the whole impetus of it was to take the first take, no editing, leave every mistake. Mm-hmm. And so it's just like, I don't know, some people could listen to it and say, well, that's just a crappy album. It's just like, it's a lazy album. And I'm like, well, maybe, but actually a lot of work went into making it sound the way that it does.
Well, it sounds really cool. And I noticed, I picked up on that. I picked up on that there's that you left some wide latitude for, the perfection of timing of things in places, it's
very elastic.
Yeah. It's elastic timing, but the sonic attention to detail and the sounds and like the coolness of everything is like, who cares, man? This just sounds super cool. And what a great variety of sound and approaches to the different records that you made too,
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, there's one album that I made in 2014 called Step Inside My Mind. And I feel like that's still, thank you so much. I really feel like that's probably one of my strongest works and really like one of my most representative things, even though it's not necessarily the funk stuff on there. I mean, there's funky stuff on there, but it's more vocal oriented, and nothing was written down at all. Like that was hit record, start playing, and music comes out, words come out, and then I would just build arrangements.
Really? Oh, that's great. Because I wanted to ask you that. Here's my question. I wrote it down. Never too late. Your lyrics are awesome. They are fearlessly innocent. And what have you learned about songwriting and speaking from the heart? That was a question I wrote about that because I was so struck by the lyrics on that one, particularly on Never Too Late. Oh,
thank you. I really like, it's akin to channeling or something where it's like, I'm not even necessarily aware of what I'm doing while I'm doing it. I'm just facilitating it through my hands and my voice and whatever. I'm not really, it's not coming from me. It's coming from some deeper inner place, and that's the whole thing is like to try to access the subconscious and let whatever thing wants to come out. Like to me, that is stronger music than I necessarily make with my conscious attention.
Yeah. And in my experience, you really have to put yourself on the spot. You have to throw yourself, you have to leap off the edge of a musical cliff where you either fly or you fall. You know what I mean?
Yes. And absolutely like that. And that's part of the rush of doing it. That's part of the thrill of improvisation for me is, I think it was Bill Bruford said once, he said, I like to hear mistakes in music because that lets me know people are really putting effort in.
Right.
And I think, that's, you even hear mistakes on a lot of Bill Bruford's tracks, with Crimson and stuff. You hear where he turned the beat around and he probably didn't mean to. But it's like he's so musical that in like, within a nanosecond, it's doing something that is, it's like a jazz musician. It's a jazz approach. It's like there are no mistakes. They're,
new directions.
It's like what?
They're just
it's new directions. Yeah, I have the shirt that says I don't make mistakes when I play piano. I make spontaneous creative decisions.
Nice.
And
that's a long shirt.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is.
The Spectra 1964 C610 comp limiter brings fast, clean, quiet compression and limiting to your recordings and mixes. The C610 includes the famous Spectra 101 amplifier used in legendary studios like Stax, Ardent, and Record Plant. I love using my C610s for drums, vocals, guitars, and especially bass, which now sounds bigger than anything I've ever recorded before. Make your mixes rock at Spectra1964.com. In my studio, I've got the Mac Mini M1 paired up with the OWC Mini Stack STX Thunderbolt 4 certified storage and hub expansion solution to connect to all my dedicated audio drives, sample libraries, and backup drives. It's the perfect size to stack with the Mac Mini and add storage and connectivity over Thunderbolt or USB. Whether you have the new or older Mac Mini, nothing stacks up in your studio quite like OWC. Find the new Mini Stack STX and all your storage needs at macsales.com/rockstars. Awesome, dude. Well, cool. So what else did you find doing your lyrics that way? So these are sort of spontaneous, impromptu lyrics.
Mm-hmm.
How do you help yourself feel good about what you end up saying lyrically so that you don't start second guessing yourself or doubling back in a process like that?
Oh, yeah, because that's the kiss of death. Like once you start thinking, then it's gone. As soon as it becomes a conscious action, then you're not in the right state of mind anymore. You've started editing, whether you realize it or not. You're starting to the internal editor is turned on, and now that prevents a lot of things from even getting through, because you're second guessing. The internal editor is going, well, I don't know. And maybe don't say that word. Say something different, And
Right.
and now you're not in the moment anymore. Now you're inside your head, and that's so like I really try to, and that's why I was really into this whole leaving mistakes in thing for a long time, because it was the idea of that's part of that. It's a messy part of that sort of spontaneous creation, like. And I feel like a lot of times especially that first tune on there, You've Arrived, that thing has gotten me through so many hard times in my life of self-doubt and whatever, because I felt like it was a message to me. Like it was kind of like, hopefully it resonates with other people but I felt like in a way it was a message from me to me. And it spoke to me right away. So in the moment, I didn't even realize what I was saying, and then I, listened back to it maybe the next day, and it's like, whoa, where did this come from? It's almost like somebody else wrote it, and to me, that's the excitement. And most of my music has been done that way. It's really funny because I was going back to to circle back to the limitations breed creativity thing. Like, most of my albums are concept albums of one type or another. Maybe not thematically, but like there's some sort of sonic or, I put some kind of parameter on it.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I don't limit the scope to a pretty severe degree, I find that I never finish anything. I've got like 10 albums in the can that are 90% finished that I just haven't had the free time to finish all the, the real nitty-gritty stuff that needs to be done at the end.
That's so weird, man. I don't think anybody else listening to this podcast has any unreleased tracks like that. That is so unusual that you would have that.
Yeah, I know I'm probably the only one, right?
Man,
I feel like I can't even get out of bed.
I'm sorry, Rockstars, for bringing Moot onto this podcast and, like really, really dropping the bar for all of us.
I feel like I can't even get out of bed in the morning without tripping over all these unfinished songs. It's like,
nice.
I'm going to wade through this sea of unfinished songs just to get to a finished product. And so that's why a lot of these things have a very, singular focus of maybe, one set of instruments, or, that's one thing I like to do is like pick out, 4 or 5 keyboards and like 2 or 3 other things. And that's the gear list.
That's good to hear, because I think that starts to touch on the question I would have wanted to get to about, like, with all these synths and everything, how do we sort them out? I mean, if you've got, especially if you're talking about the world of software synthesizers, oh my God, you've got an endless list of sounds available. And how do you ever navigate that? How do you narrow that down? So talk more about that, about narrowing it down. If it's physical synths, you might be like, here's the 4, that's the end of it. But if you're going into the world of software too, do you have a way of narrowing that down?
Well, that actually brings me back to a point I was trying to articulate earlier, and I kept sort of branching off. But yeah, I think that's a very modern problem, especially in the software world. I mean, even with plugins, like how many, God knows, I probably got 20 different compressors, and or more. And it's like we're spoiled for choice. If these things were hardware units, none of us would have this many. But because it's just data, we can have as many as we want. So like I think a lot of times it can be paralyzing creatively, because it's unless you just go ahead and commit to a direction. And I feel like, having all of this intensive metering for everything and knowing down to the 0.1 dB what everything is, a lot of times I think we end up using our eyes to make music rather than our ears.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I appreciate about a lot of analog things, that you don't have a whole lot of visual feedback a lot of times.
Yeah, you start to your eyes are looking at like how much you moved the fader maybe, and that's about it,
Yeah, and so that creates this something in your brain goes, oh, well, I changed something. And so your brain wants to hear a change. And so, it's this whole psychological, thing that you're doing to yourself. And so I think that, that's another thing about not overthinking, though, isn't it? It's just like commit to a direction. I kind of know what I'm going for. And I'm not going to really just like look at every other option. So a lot of times, like if I'm trying to do a specific sound design, like if I've got a project for a client, if it's a soundtrack thing or, whatever it is, and there's a certain thing that I'm going for, I already have in my head, because I have, there's not many synthesizers that have ever been made that I haven't at least played once.
Nice.
I have a good friend who I've been knowing for 6 or 7 years now, and he is he's not a musician per se, but he is a vintage synthesizer obsessive, and he has an amazing collection. I mean, you name it, and so I sort of helped him curate his collection. He and another friend, and it's really remarkable. And what a luxury that I can go and hang out with him and play.
That's cool.
All these.
When is he
synths.
having us all over for the synth party? That's what we want to know.
That's a good question, man. That's a good question. It's something that we've talked about for years, but that's another topic.
Are you getting into like modular synths and all that kind of stuff, and really like hooking up the wires for some of this stuff?
If it's for myself, yeah. But like I usually shy away from a lot of modular sound design for clients, just because like I want it to be something repeatable. And so oftentimes I will reach for software first. And so like I've kind of got this library of sounds in my head of like, okay, it's sort of, I'm looking for a Prophet 5 type of a sound. And so if none of my software Prophet 5s are doing the trick, maybe I'll go for something else or whatever. But I think that it's important to sort of have a direction in your head before you even like start the process. Even if because that process is going to change anyway. It's gonna evolve as you move creatively. It's you're going to end up somewhere that maybe you hadn't intended to start. But I think it's important to have at least kind of a starting point. Because otherwise you're floundering. You're just like searching through endless lists of presets and patches and you can get down that rabbit hole for a long time. Like, when I got the Arturia stuff, and there's some amazing sound design in there, but gosh, I mean, you can get lost in the labyrinth of just checking out patches all day, and you never even you never recorded a single note.
And the toughest part is that it won't even not be fun. Like, it's fun to listen to all the synth sounds all day long.
Yeah, the whole time you were having a blast. Yeah. And so, but on the hardware side of things, that's just, okay. So for a lot of years, I was one of these, I think maybe it's a naivety of a young person. I was an analog purist.
Right.
Like everything has to be analog. Like I don't even want to use digital reverb. Like, the only thing digital is when I finally make a master file that I can share with somebody. And I was completely anti MIDI. I thought that MIDI, like using it, recording MIDI and then editing the MIDI and then sending that back to a synth was like cheating.
Right.
And I thought that doing any kind of like edits, like if I like doing a punch in or something, I thought, nope. If I've got to punch in, that means I don't really know how to play the song, and I need to like just get better, just get good.
Yeah.
And that's, so I put all these limitations on myself because I was a purist. And then I started doing it for a living, and that cured me of purism real quick because you got to work smarter, not harder. When somebody's paying you, by the project, and all of a sudden you put all these extra hours because you are so committed to using a real Wurlitzer instead of a software one, or whatever it is, it's like I find that in a mix nowadays, a sample can be just fine. And it took me like, 5 less hours of editing and miking and whatever,
Yeah. Yeah. There can be times where it might be worth it to put in all that time and effort.
Yes.
But hopefully those opportunities will present themselves to you and you'll know it before you put in all that time and effort, and you won't, waste it on the project where they're just going to come right back and go, hey, can we use something else instead after you spend ages?
Yeah.
Or change the chord or change the last note of the song. And you're like, crap, how did I even get that sound?
That's true. And well, that's a lot of times, like, if it's a singer songwriter type of person that I'm working with, I'll sort of, we'll get down a rough guitar and vocal or piano and vocal or whatever. And then I'll build a really, really uber quantized MIDI track around it, and quantized because I want to be able to just move things around in the DAW. Like if they decide to repeat the chorus again, or they want to, move this verse and whatever they want to do, like we get the arrangement intact. And so I have this musical scaffolding of like fake bass and fake drums and fake keyboard. And then I just go through the process of replacing those with the real instrument once we get the arrangement.
And doesn't Logic give you an arrangement view where you can just copy an entire section up in the arrangement ruler or something like that?
Yeah, you basically just like set some locators and then there's like buttons, repeat section, cut section, whatever. And so that actually gets me back to this process of these last 2 albums that I've made. So my last one was called King in Exile, and this one is called ADD. And they both were using the same process, except King in Exile features a whole lot of DX7. There's like a whole lot of Yamaha FM synth on there.
I like it. The 2 records go hand in hand. It's King in Exile, but then AD&D, because it turns out the King actually just forgot how to get home because he got distracted by a squirrel.
Yeah, that sounds pretty accurate.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So a lot of DX7. So we're going to have to start pivoting too, because it's fun for me to start hitting you with the questions like, what's a DX7? So that brings up like FM modulation, frequency modulation, synthesis. So I want to ask you this basic question. Give us an overview, if you feel like it's not unfair for me to ask, of like, what are the basic types of synthesis that make up a variety of synthesizers?
Well, okay, so subtractive synthesis, meaning that you start out with a raw tone, and then you're using filters and envelope generators and stuff to basically remove harmonic content or shape harmonic content. Mm-hmm. And that's, just your standard subtractive synthesis. I think that's
saying that it's like you start with too much sound and you take away a bunch of sound to end up with what you want.
Yeah, more or less. Yeah, it's like you have a sound, you have an oscillator or some kind of wavetable or something that is generating this full frequency range, and it's just it might be a sawtooth wave or a square wave or something. And this is the most plain basic sound, and
it's
you're
playing
filtering
forever, and it's just going forever if you just turned it on.
Yeah, and it's interesting, like and this actually kind of gets into the whole talk box thing. Is your voice, your voice, like your mouth is a filter, and basically we're the sound coming out of the larynx, is your vocal cords are just producing this buzzy tone. It's just
Yeah.
you're just vibrating a harmonic rich tone that you're filtering out harmonics with your mouth. And that's how a talk box works, is like you just replace the buzzy sound from your vocal cords with an
acoustic filter of your larynx and mouth and stuff, right?
Yeah. So like, you're instead of doing that, you're using the the buzzy sound from a synthesizer, just a straight sawtooth wave with no filtering on it whatsoever.
Yeah,
and that's the talk box.
And then the I guess with your voice, you're pushing air through with each thing that you want to say or sing. And you might be opening your mouth and your lips to like, start and stop a sound. And that would be the envelope section of the amplifier on a synth.
That's right. Yeah. So, I mean, in a way, we kind of are sound synthesizers.
Plus gate and trigger. You got to have those in there too, right?
Yeah. And, and gate and trigger they differ in that, gate will stay, it's usually 0 to 5 volts if you're talking voltage controlled analog synths. And so like, the gate will stay high until you release the key or release the signal. Whereas a trigger will just hit a pulse and that's it,
Right. So the gate is like hitting a key on an organ. It's all there. And when you lift the key, it's all gone.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And then the trigger is a spike that can actually make the envelope filter do its thing, which is like attack and decay and release and all that, right? What's ADSR?
ADSR, yeah. So it'll just go through attack, decay, sustain, release. Like it'll just, hit it with a trigger and then it'll go through the whole cycle once.
Cool.
And my friend, suit and tie guy up in Illinois has some real innovations in the modular world with envelope generators. I think the STG Sound Labs envelope generator, I think, is like the best one that's been made. It's actually digital. It uses a lookup table to generate the curves, but that enables it to have all these different things. Like it's a looping mode, where it will just keep looping through however you have it set. Okay. And then there's there's a thing where you can set it to, it will loop as long as it's seeing a gate signal. And so you can do all these interesting, you can use it like a modulator instead of just as, a one-time sound shaper,
So this is an envelope generator. So now we're describing a little bit of the modular synthesis where Rockstars, you think about like, and correct me if I'm wrong, Moot, because I'm a little new to this, but you would have a synth, but then you'd also have this box called the STG Sound Labs, and you'd plug some wires over to the synth. And when you hit the gate on a key, it triggers the STG box, which sends back like a shape for the amplifier on the output of this analog synth, so that it is it's letting the sound like, have a quick start and a slow release, or a slow swell up like a string pad, or like you're saying, it just keeps doing it over and over again. And now it's like a tremolo kind of effect or something.
Yeah. Or, you could do that whole Blondie, that like just, auto triggered sound, like Heart of Glass or something, and it says anyway, it's a very interesting approach, and it also includes like the trapezoid generator that was the envelopes in the old Synthy.
Oh yeah, the Synthy was that beautiful. Trying to remember if they had one of those, like the EMI Synthy. Didn't they have that for Dark Side of the Moon? Wasn't that like in the documentary? He's playing around with that.
The AKS, the Synthy AKS. Yeah, that's like On the Run and all that stuff.
Yeah.
I challenged myself a couple years ago to recreate On the Run 100% with a modular. So there's a video on YouTube of that.
Oh my God, I gotta see that.
And because it was another STG module, actually, he came out with a clone of the Synthes filter, and it's spot on. So it was like very easy to dial in that sort of like sweet spot, that On the Run thing. And
well, when I think about kind of, I mean that the EMI Synthy would obviously be, or that STG would be the way to go for that kind of sound. But when I was looking, for example, at the Behringer synths, because they seem to be doing a great job of making these recreating all these synths that are really affordable for people to get into if they want. And I guess they're doing modular synths as well. I haven't really looked closely at that, but like the ARP 2600, that seemed like a good one to reach for if I was going to try and get like a looping on the run kind of thing going for a song production. Does that sound like the right kind of thinking about it?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that question? I just got totally distracted.
That's what I do, man. I bring out the best ADD in all of us.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
No, just thinking about the ARP 2600 or like the Behringer version of that as a good one to try and create like a looping rhythmic sound like on the run for Dark Side of the Moon. If we were like thinking, oh, let's do something cool like that for production, would a 2600 be a good synth to use for something like that?
The 2600 is a good synth to use for anything. I really think right. If the Mini Moog is the king of synth, the 2600 is the queen of synth. It's there, to me, that's the reigning champions, the heavyweight champions of synthesizer right there. Is the Mini Moog and the ARP 2600, which were, I mean, basically the first, as far as like completely self-contained units that you can take on a stage. And for years, I took my Mini Moog on the stage with me, and I had my ARP Odyssey and Mini Moog up there, play the bass on the Odyssey, do leads on the Mini Moog. And then the value of these reissue Mini Moogs shot through the ceiling. And I just thought, why am I carrying around something that's worth more than my car? Nice. And like to bars and stuff.
Yeah, like, there's some videos of you and a drummer just playing sort of with, in an outdoor mall setting or something with palm trees going down there. And I'm looking over and I'm like, good Lord, he's got like legit Moog synths and harps going and stuff
in the
like
middle of the street.
Yeah. I don't know if how often the rain comes down in Florida, but I imagine
and that's the thing is like, especially in the summer months, it can be raining on one side of your house and not raining on the other side of your house.
Yeah.
And it'll rain for 5 minutes and be done. And you're like, okay, good. The rain's done for the day. You go out, you do what you're thinking, and here it comes again.
Yeah.
And it's just, very weird weather patterns. I always say, if you don't like the weather in Florida, wait 5 minutes.
Want to know how I get a consistent sound quality mixing hundreds of episodes of Recording Studio Rockstars? Well, I've been cheating all along by using Isotope RX and Ozone on every single episode. Right now, you're hearing RX declick, declip, DS, deplosive, voice denoise, ozone multiband compression, EQ, and limiting on this podcast episode. Try out the subscription option with an extended 30-day free trial at isotope.com/rockstars or use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off any individual plugin purchase. Before your band hits the studio, it's smart to have all the songs and notes in one place. But setting up a shared cloud folder can be frustrating. There's always someone in the band who can't seem to log in or wants to use a different platform. Samply.app makes it easy to add collaborators to a project so that the whole band can upload new songs and make comments before the session. It's file sharing that was specifically built for music. Just upload a voice memo or song and start commenting. Sign up for your free account with 2 projects now at Samply.app or use the coupon code RSR20 to get 20% off the first 3 months. If there's other super affordable synths you want to mention, great. I just found myself getting really excited by these Behringer ones because they're super cheap, and you seem to be able to get some really great stuff for the studio at a good low price point.
Yeah, and so I mean, we can get on the Behringer topic for a minute. Like that, sure. Behringer has been a very contentious topic for its entire existence, I think. In years past, they had, because they did a lot of down market stuff, like I felt like they, had a reputation for making crap gear. The stuff that, don't buy Behringer, that thing falls apart. I think that they really, really changed that. They stepped up their level of quality considerably. And a lot of the things they make now, I think, especially since they acquired Midas and all that, like I'm actually using a Behringer interface right now. It's the UMC 404 HD, and I really like it. Like, that's my mobile interface.
Right on.
And, like, I can't really say anything bad about Behringer products, and that's why I was a mouthpiece, I guess, of sorts for Behringer for about a year. And there was no ill will or anything bad that happened that the relationship ended. It just ended. It was like we just kind of stopped talking, and and it was around the time when they were getting some kind of negative press early last year, and so it really did. It felt like the universe did me a favor.
Yeah. Well,
it's stepping away.
We don't have to make this a commentary on, Behringer, the company.
Oh, no,
but I do think their synths look pretty awesome. I mean,
they're great.
I really enjoyed watching your videos. You did one the Poly D, the Model D. Let me start with that question. So those are both Moog sort of emulators. And I again, not a place for the commentary on it, but Rockstars, if you want a Moog, go get a Moog. But if you want something that's, an alternative to that, these might be worth looking at. What about the Model D and the Poly D? Why would we want to get one versus the other? And what is it?
Okay, so the Mini Moog, of course, the venerable Mini Moog, like that, people have tried to clone it before, but I don't think anybody did really a successful one until the Behringer Model D, which, I mean, you can get one for $300 or less now, And I mean, to have that Mini Moog sound in hardware for that kind of money, and a guy that I know, Jareth Lackey, who is a absolute monster of a Moog technician. He would be my first. If I had any kind of Moog with a problem, he'd be my first call. That guy has troubleshooted a Poly Moog for me, like from bed. Like this guy,
Nice.
this guy wanted a Poly Moog. He was a Gary Newman fan and wanted a Poly Moog when he was like in high school. And so his parents, I guess, bought him one or whatever, and it didn't work because it's a Poly Moog. And if you look at a Poly Moog for too long, it'll go out of calibration. So it's like the thing, you can't say anything bad around a Poly Moog. You got to tiptoe around a Poly Moog.
Right.
I mean, it's
don't dance in the control room.
Oh no! Don't even shoot a quick glance at it. It might turn off. It's like the most volatile thing. But it's because it's like extremely complicated piece of equipment. But anyway, so this guy, talk about dipping your not dipping your toe in, but jumping into the deep end head first. The thing didn't work, so he got the service manual, took the thing completely apart, put it all back together, learned how to fix Moogs, and that's been his career.
And what's his name again? Let's give him a shout out.
Jareth Lackey. Yeah, Synth Pro. Synth Pro is his
okay.
Yeah, the dude's amazing. And so he consulted on the Model D for Behringer. He was one, he had input into the sonic, topology of it and really making sure that it sounded like it should. Yeah. And so is it a Mini Moog? Of course not. But is it like 95%? Absolutely. And so I'm actually about to get one to replace my real Mini Moog for my live rig, so I can have that sound back. Nice. Because I just don't want to take it out of the studio anymore, and so now I can have that thing. So I did replace my Mini Moog with the Poly D for a long time, and I was using the Poly D. But what I found is that in a live situation, so the Poly D is a Frankenstein sort of a thing. I think it was Uli Behringer's brainchild. I think it's pretty amazing. So it's like 4 or 5 things in one package. So is a voice allocation system similar to the Korg Mono Poly. So the Korg Mono Poly it was called that because you could play it either mono synth or 4-note poly. So it had 4 oscillators in it that normally would just work like a regular, monophonic analog synth. But you could put it into this other mode where you could play chords and it would just split the 4 out. Right. And there was like, 2 or 3 different ways that you could allocate the voices. Like you could make it to where if you only play one note, you get all 4 oscillators. But if you play a chord, it'll split them out. Right. Or you can make it to where it just plays one at a time. Okay. So the Poly D works like that. And then it has the sequencer built into it. That is the same sequencer that that's found on the Crave and the Odyssey and the MS1, which is a SH101 type synth. And I think there's another one. I don't. Anyway, those are the three that come to mind that have that sequencer in them. And so the Poly D has that sequencer, and then it has basically a Boss DS1 type distortion box in it. It has a chorus unit that is based on the Roland Juno chorus, and of course, the rest of the guts are based on the Mini Moog. But I feel that because I feel like the gain structure is a little bit different than a Mini Moog, because they sort of had to, I think they had to kind of like change the internal gain structure in order to accommodate 4 oscillators instead of 3, and also to not make it sound like total mud when you play chords. So it's a little cleaner. So I found it to be a little bit too, it wasn't dirty enough for my liking for the stuff that I do live.
That's cool. That's kind of what I started to pick up on watching some of the stuff. I got the impression that the Model D might do fewer less things. Is that the right English? But it seemed to have a really good tone to it.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Yes, the Poly D is a cool thing because it's a bunch of different ideas in one unit, and you can't beat the price and as far as what you get for the money.
Yeah.
But it's like what I found that live, like sometimes I wanted to use it like to play chords and do like brass parts and stuff, but that would mean that if I wanted to have in-tune chords, that I couldn't do any detuning on the oscillators when I flipped it into mono to play leads. So it was a really limitation for live. But in the studio, it's great. I love it in the studio.
Yeah,
and I think that's really a good studio piece.
Well, that's the cool thing about this show is we're all about the studio. So we're down with things that work well in the studio, even if they might not be the live rig. Well, that's cool. Yeah. So, and then if we are not familiar with why we would want a Moog sound or, the Model D or the Poly D, what are some, I like to break it down into like, how should we think about what part in a music production we might be using this instrument for? Like if we talked about a guitar, you'd be like, oh, that's for a guitar part, or bass is for a bass part. How do we want to think about a synth like this as far as which part of the song we might use it for composing?
Well, I mean, even though I play bass guitar and I love the sound of bass guitar, I find myself reaching for Moog bass like 90% of the time because my left hand on keys is way more efficient than my hands on a bass guitar. And it's a lot less editing and a lot less hassle. So Moog bass, that sound, or ARP bass, ARP Odyssey type sound is, if you want a funky sound, like I did a couple of videos called synth bass, funk bass face off or something. It was like, nice. it was the ARP Odyssey versus the Mini Moog. The two, the bass synths that people have used a lot. The Odyssey, like that Herbie Hancock sound. And I really feel like if you want that funky sound, the ARP really has an edge over the Moog. Yeah. But as far as for a great all around synth bass that doesn't really necessarily sound like a synth bass, that's, the Mini Moog is what I would go for. But I mean, yeah, I guess it depends on what type of music you're making. It's like I've always enjoyed music that might have everything else, every other element is organic, but there might be like a Mini Moog sound in there. There's just like playing some different lines in there, playing maybe a high melody line or something. To me, that's a cool sound. It doesn't have to be completely immersed in synths in order to employ synths in music.
Right. It can be, and that's great to hear because that was going to be one of my questions is how can we think about incorporating synths into rock and band productions where you've got guitars, bass, and drums. And I think that's a good way to think about it. I know that for me, I find that melody lines is very useful for that. Chord pads where you want to like have, you want to lift a section, you want to give a section a whole new kind of space and mood can be really cool. Although I don't know if a Model D, Poly D, Moog sound, that might be more like a lead line as opposed to, and I could be saying this wrong, as opposed to the pad, whereas pads might be a place where you're really glad that you've got the synth that has all the extra bells and whistles because it and effects and reverbs and stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly. Two completely different approaches. Like, I find myself, even though I'm a keyboard player, a polyphonic keyboard player, I still find myself with mostly monophonic synthesizers. And I've recently got more poly stuff, but yeah, poly synth like a Juno or something is it's just a completely different headspace than like a Moog or an ARP, that's just got one note at a time.
Yeah.
Like it's, because now you can approach it more texturally, it more like, and that's one of the things I like about the Juno 6 is that, there's no presets on it. There's just one oscillator on it. There's like basic controls, and you can look at a glance and know exactly what it's going to sound like just from seeing where the controls are.
Right.
And that's part of the, just like experimenting with a keyboard or experimenting with a piece of equipment until you kind of build that mental association with, okay, when I set the knobs here, this is generally what it's going to sound like. And you kind of are, and you get to a place where like I can just like look at a mini Moog and tell you what it's going to sound like. Just because I just, after a while, you just after playing with it enough and understanding what all the settings are, you can just pretty much just look at all the knob positions and go, okay, well that's going to be that's going to be a fluty type sound. Okay, that's going to be more of a string type sound. This is going to be a real hard bass. You can kind of just tell by looking.
Yeah, that's cool. And that reminds me of how to get to know your synths, they can become more like getting to know your guitars or your effects pedals, where you're like, this brings is definitely up a Tele or something like that.
Yeah, well, okay, this brings up a good point. You were asking me earlier about how do you limit the scope of gear when you've got a whole bunch of synthesizers and stuff?
Yeah.
I mean, I've probably got 3 dozen synthesizers, I've got a lot and they all do something different. And a person that is, a lay person would come into my house and go, why do you have so many keyboards? Don't they all do the same thing? Don't they all make
fun.
Music? Yeah. It's like, yeah.
I sleep with a different keyboard every night. Just kidding.
One night stands with keyboards. I mean, I do. I love my keyboards like they're my family, but it's a thing like guitars. Okay. You buy, you've got a Strat, you got a Tele, you got a Les Paul, you got a 335. So, and on, right? But you kind of get all the different types of guitars. Maybe you got a 12 string, you got this. But if you're going to get more guitars, you're going to end up just getting more iterations on those archetypes. You're just kind of end up like with more Les Pauls and more Strat type guitars and more, more SG type guitars. And it's not just a great gulf of tone between all of those. Of course, all the guitar players are going to, shoot me, but I'm also a guitar player. So, I mean, I have a ton of guitars too. But I'm just saying that like, I haven't collected as many guitars because I haven't had a need for that many copies of the same thing. Whereas a synthesizer, like, they might both have, 37 keys on them and they have this many oscillators and they got this many things, but they might sound completely different and give you a completely different, feeling and a different workflow. And so it's important to have all these different tools.
Yeah.
But that's why you end up with so many. And like there was a time when I owned like a dozen keyboards and none of them made a piano sound.
The API Select T12 is a 2-channel, all-tube Class A microphone preamp designed with API's proprietary AP2516 transformer on the input stage and a custom API transformer on the output stage. Built with the 12 AT7WC and 12 BH7 dual triode vacuum tubes, the T12 represents a new and exciting variation on API's classic preamp technology and provides you with unique tonal options for your studio, handling a wide range of recording applications, including stereo operation. Carefully engineered to provide classic tube performance and sound, the T12 brings you API's famous warmth, punch, and clarity in a new design, including a 5-year warranty. Check out the new T12 Tube Mic Pre and T25 Tube Compressor at apiaudio.com. The first rule of mixing is make good mix choices. To do that, you need to be able to hear your music clearly and accurately. Can you imagine trying to paint a masterpiece while wearing rose-colored glasses, or choosing spices for a new recipe with no sense of taste or smell? You would blindly guess with every brushstroke, or think that your cooking is amazing when actually it's terrible. That's how it feels to mix when the frequency response of your room is impacting the sound of your music. Even after you carefully position your speakers and sound treat your room, you're probably not getting an accurate sound at your mix position. The frequencies in your room can have huge peaks and valleys that are completely screwing up your perspective. This is where SonarWorks Sound ID Reference can help you with the affordable solution for calibrating EQ and balance of your speakers and headphones to give you an accurate flat frequency response. By helping you to hear your music clearly, you can now start to get your mixes right. Get a 21-day free trial at sonarworks.com. Hey, Rockstars, we're back now for the jam session. My guest today is Moot Booxlé, joining us from Fort Myers, Florida. Moot, Are you ready to get groovy?
I am ready.
All right, good deal. Hey, you started, well, actually, let's pivot on this. I'll come back to this question. Just off mic, I was saying that I've discovered I'm kind of addicted to synth videos. Like, I can turn on a YouTube video, watch you playing around with synths and showing how they work in different sounds, and realize that I enjoy listening to that, even if it's not a song that's playing. You know, it's just sounds, which is funny. And you seem to have something you wanted to say about that.
Yeah, we've there's been sort of a joke, in the synth community that like synth demo music should be its own genre, because it's like there is a certain thing that people tend to do. I know there's a certain thing that I tend to do when I'm doing a synth demo that's definitely different than if I was actually performing music. Okay. What do you think it is? Is it like a lot more soloing stuff, or is it more like a lot more sweeping cool effects and stuff that doesn't necessarily fit into a song production? Well, like my poly D. Okay, well, first of all, like I used to have a lot of talking in my synth demos, and I would explain things verbally as I'm doing it, and that seemed to not go over well. And I think as people, as time marches on, we get less and less of an attention span, and people really don't want to have to wait around to get into the real meat and potatoes of the thing. It's watching synth videos where I learned the term, in parentheses, no talking, for a YouTube title. Because that's like a big sticking point with so many people that you got to just go ahead and put it up. So like I was offended for a long time. Like, what, you don't want to hear me talk? Like, but I understand. And like once I understood that and sort of just doubled down on the part that I do best, which is playing. I mean, I still enjoy, giving demonstrations and teaching things, but I understand that, like, a lot of times if you're going to make a decision about whether to buy a keyboard or not, you just want to hear what the thing sounds like. You don't really want to, have some guy telling you what it sounds like. Yeah, yeah. And there's actually a really hilarious YouTube channel that like parodies this. It's like Effects and Pedals Arena Corner, I think it's called. And it's basically just like this guy going on and on, like trying to demo a pedal, but he never actually does anything. and it's just like, I'm going to go ahead and get into it now. And then like it has all these cutaways to other things that aren't even relevant to the topic. And it's just like all the tropes of bad YouTube gear demo videos. Yeah. It's like YouTube videos about speakers
or headphones. How are you supposed to do that?
Well, in a lot of modular synthesizers, there's like these, passive modules, like usually like passive multiples, like, and people have, it's just a bunch of jacks ganged together so that you can send the signal to multiple places, right? Mm-hmm. And they're passive. They're it's literally just a bunch of jacks soldered together. And I mean, they make active ones too, but I'm talking about passive multiples. And I've got like ones from like 4 different brands. And like one thing that I want to do is make a shootout video. I mean, it's like the most pointless thing ever, it's like, and you got to use all these terms like you're some kind of wine connoisseur, it's just like, well, this is more of a burnished sound. I don't know. This is just more of a burnished. It's definitely more delicate timbre. Yeah.
All right, cool, okay, man.
I got off the subject. What was I talking about? So the synth videos. Yeah. And so no talking. And what I'll do. So my Poly D video has been like my most popular one in some years. Like I've been on YouTube since YouTube began, and I had early on a lot of success and had some real viral stuff like the Ghetto Talk Box. That was 1 million views. I did a Talkbox Christmas song that's become kind of a classic for certain people.
Nice, man. I think I saw something of you. You looking like a young kid in like early 2000 playing drums. You're a badass drummer, dude. You started playing drums in your videos, and I was like, what? I thought this guy was all about synths.
Drums is my favorite instrument. I'd rather play drums than breathe. I love drums. Like that's like and when I teach people, sometimes I'll do like I don't have a lot of time now, but I still keep a calendar for online lessons. Mm-hmm. And when I over Zoom and when I do lessons, like usually people want to learn like this funky synth approach, right? And anybody that wants to learn this funky synth approach, I just tell them like, look, I'm primarily, even though everybody knows me as this keyboard guy, I really consider myself primarily a drummer, and drums is like my like favorite thing. And I don't get to do it much because like I used to get all these drum gigs, and then I moved to Florida, and like there's lots of great drummers like my friend Daryl Nutt that I play with in the Moots. That's my little duo that was playing in the street. Like he, like there's tons of guys around here that are just like really good, and well, not as good as Daryl, but like he's phenomenal player. So I mean, when there's Daryl around, why do they need me? So it's kind of like there weren't that many people who do what I do on keys, and so just by default, I ended up getting all these keyboard jobs. Yeah. So it's just by just because of that, I've kind of become known as that. But I still approach everything like a drummer, and that's what I teach people is like when you're trying to play clavinet, for example. I'll tell people start out just like use your left hand like it's the kick, use your right hand like it's the snare, and just play drum patterns, boom, tink, boom, boom, tink, boom, and just like learn this two-handed syncopation. And then you can start doing all the representing all the ghost notes and all the stuff in between. And that's when you get into the real funky syncopation, is when there's like, because like, you watch any funk guitar player, you watch Nile Rodgers play rhythm guitar. I think he's the best rhythm guitarist ever. Nice. And like if you listen to his I Want Your Love, the extended, the 12-inch version of I Want Your Love by Chic is like his rhythm playing on there is the tightest thing, and his control over the muting, over the palm muting, like between like a very short notes, very staccato and longer notes, and it breathes in this really organic way. And I feel like that's the funk, where it's almost the notes that aren't it's percussive. It's like the muted notes have just as much significance as the notes that ring.
Yeah, that's such an important thing in the studio. And I feel like one of the first places I really became aware of that was on bass, for example. It's like, it's the space between the bass notes that make the bass notes have impact.
Ain't that the truth? And just by changing the articulation of the bass, it can really kind of like point toward a different style of music altogether. Like you can approach a ballad with a with a lot of long notes, and it's completely different than like a funk ballad. A funk ballad is like its own thing. It's like a different type of it's an energetic ballad.
Right.
So it might be super slow. It might be 70 BPM, but because of the way the bass is driving it, it still sounds funky.
Yeah. Well, so let me take us back to synths for a minute now, because there's so much fun stuff to talk about, and I do want to talk more about drums. You started to tell us about subtractive synthesis and what it is, but then a couple others I wrote down, and there might be more. There's FM synthesis, wavetable synthesis. Tell us a little bit, give us a little bit more introduction into stuff that we should know about as a beginner.
Well, okay, so there's also additive synthesis.
Okay.
Which is something that like Bell Labs and stuff have been like experimenting with for decades, long time. Like the idea that actually, I guess if you go all the way back to the first electronic instrument, arguably the Teleharmonium.
Is that the Russian film where the lights are shining through and flashing?
Oh, no, that's a different thing.
That's what Kevin White was on the show, and he was talking about that as one of the very first synthesizers too. But tell us about the Teleharmonium.
Yeah, so Thaddeus Cahill made this thing called the Teleharmonium, and it was basically transmitted over phone lines. I mean, this was like turn of the 20th century, I think. And so this thing just generated pure sine waves, and it was played, like an organ. And so an organ, to go into that, right? Like an organ, a Hammond organ is an additive synthesizer. So because you're starting with just sine tones, just very, no harmonics, a sine wave doesn't have any harmonic content. It's just fundamental. So you're building the harmonics by adding more sine tones at harmonic intervals. And that's additive synthesis.
Right.
So
you're intentionally adding the overtones.
Yeah.
One by one.
So instead of like shaping a sound with all the overtones into the overtones you want, now you're specifically adding the overtones you want.
Nice.
So a wavetable, of course, is just there's just a digital lookup table that's got, it might have samples of sounds, or it might just have it's usually just like a bunch of single cycle waveforms, like different ones, like, and of course, like the Korg wave, all the wavetable Korg things and the Waldorf things, like, these are very complex wavetables, but it's just a digital memory that is either cycling or it will scan through them. So like the PPG wave, has like a certain sound, but it's like there's a digital component,
right? Less knobs, like like a Moog, a Pro One, the K2. I'm dropping Behringer names now, but the 2600. These are all about having a knob to reach for different effects. Even my DeepMind. But when you get into stuff like wavetables, you're moving into the digital synth world, virtual synth on your computer or an outboard thing, but you're having to go into menus and stuff, right?
Right. Well, which brings us to one of my favorite topics, which is FM synthesis and the Yamaha of the 80s.
Yeah.
So,
and the DX7,
Dr. John Chowney,
the DX7, right?
Yeah. So, this is like something that they, that was developed long before it reached the public's ears and fingers. It's since the 70s, but like Yamaha was like, they shaped this into, of course, the instrument that changed everything, the DX7. And so a DX7 has what they call, instead of oscillators, they call them operators, because each operator kind of is a whole self-contained building block. And so it's algorithmic. So like the algorithm is just determining how these 6 things are modulating one another. So you're starting with regular sine waves, pure sine tones again, but you're modulating them with one another to create all these sidebands and harmonics and it's a whole different world. And I don't get into the mathematics of it so much, but so when I was 11 years old, my mom's dad, got a DX7 II, and I was absolutely glued to it. I would go over there and make a beeline for the back room where the DX7 was and spend the entire time playing it.
That's great.
So I carried the manual around with me everywhere, read it cover to cover. I mean, I really knew the DX7 Mark II backwards and forwards by the time I was 12.
Now, why do you say it was such a game changer as a synth? Like, why did it change music forever or whatever?
Well, think about this. Okay, so it's 1983. And all that people have known for the most part is there. If it's digital, there's still going to be analog type things going on with the sound shaping, right? Most people are just using, they're using Junos and they're using Jupiters and they're using, the memory Moogs and Prophet 5s and Oberheims and all this kind of stuff, right? Mm-hmm. And those things were big and expensive, and regardless of how long you spent programming your OBXA or whatever, you can't make it sound like a piano or a French horn or whatever, like right. in a super convincing way. But everybody wanted that, and all these multi keyboard players are carrying all these different keyboards to a gig so they can cover all these different sounds. Yeah. And here comes this thing that's like, I think it cost like $2,000 when it was new. And all of a sudden you've got all of those sounds in one box, and it's not heavy, and it's convenient. And the problem, of course, is that it's a complete paradigm shift when it comes to the way you make sounds yourself. Like, thank goodness there's like some decent sounds in the presets that the ROM discs that the cartridges of right. the original ROM.
Think
the original
Atari
ROM
2600, set. Right?
Yeah, exactly. A cartridge just like that, and gosh, those things are still expensive, man. Like the last one I bought was like $90, $100.
Wow.
And it only stores like 64 sounds on it, and so the DX7, all of a sudden you got 32 presets. And they're all pretty decent, but nobody understood how to use the freaking thing. So because now all of a sudden you don't have any knobs at all. You don't have, you got to dive through a menu, and there's no oscillators. Like, where's the filter cutoff? There ain't one. You got to change the modulation level. Oh and now you've got, instead of ADSRs, you've got these complicated 4-stage envelopes that have 4 rates and 4 levels. So they can be anything. And it works counterintuitively that like lowering the rate makes it longer. So like if you want to, so your release, if you got a sound that cuts off as soon as you let off the key, that would be, that would be your final stage at like maximum. So you actually have to back it down lower instead of higher. You're not adding release time. You're lowering the rate so that the release is long. It's a different way of thinking about everything. Yeah. The whole, it's just a completely different. And so I think most people didn't really get their head around it. And a lot of people just ended up using the presets. And so those presets, that E-bass, that the electric piano sounds,
right?
Yeah. The tubular bell sound, the electric piano sound, the, what's another one that's real big?
I don't know, like a Rhodes or a Worley.
There's the one bass that's on like Danger Zone by Kenny Loggins. That's that's DX7 all day. And then there's like the other bass preset that's all over Take My Breath Away by Berlin. And then that piano sound was just everywhere, and pretty much any kind of rompler that's come out, so basically when I say rompler, a sampler that doesn't sample. It's got all samples built into it, but otherwise has all the other functions that like a sampling instrument would have, like filters and stuff. So every rompler preset keyboard you buy has a DX7 Rhodes sound in it because it became so ubiquitous. and I think that killed, that was what killed, Rhodes made one more Rhodes after the DX7 came out. That was the Mark V. And that was it, because I mean, like, how do you compete? You've got this big, heavy electromechanical instrument competing with this thing that you can just, throw in the back of the car and sounds, 90% like what everybody wanted. It was
Yeah.
like it doesn't sound like a Rhodes, but it's got that sparkly sound, and it just became, and so nobody knew how to program the thing. So the presets became everywhere, flooded the airwaves. And I think that's why a lot of people hate the DX7 is because they are so sick of hearing those same 4 or 5 sounds.
That's funny, man. So you just finished an awesome mix and sent it off to the band, but the singer texts you with lyric changes, the drummer emails you wanting a different fill, and the bass player DMs you on Instagram about a wrong note in the chorus. But which mix version are they talking about anyway? Don't you wish there was an easier way? Samply.app comes to the rescue as your ultimate mix assistant, streaming high-quality mixes so your clients can easily listen and send notes from their mobile phone on the road or a computer back in the studio. All mix comments are time-stamped directly onto the correct mix version with no confusion, and everything is easy to find in one location. No more mixed-up mix messages from the band. It's file sharing that was specifically built for music, and it all works in your browser with no downloads required. Sign up for your free account with 2 projects now at samply.app and use the coupon code RSR20 to get 20% off the first 3 months when you're ready to upgrade. Have you ever wished you could remove the click track bleed from a singer's vocal mic, the sound of shuffling feet from a full choir, or clicking noises from the valves of an otherwise brilliant trumpet solo? These are just some of the incredible things I've been able to clean up, edit, or remove from a recording using the magic of iZotope RX. Great for mixing with a collection of plugins for your DAW to manage plosives, clicks, S's, noise, buzz, reverb, breaths, and even guitar fret squeaks with a set it and forget it simplicity that lets you focus on your creativity in the studio while you let iZotope handle the audio challenges. If you've ever wanted to truly feel like a magician in the studio, then iZotope RX is your magic wand. Try out the subscription option with an extended 30-day free trial at iZotope.com/rockstars or use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off any individual plugin purchase. Well, I think about how software synths came into being, and now all of a sudden your computer can kind of do everything and plugins. And thank God, thank God we still want the real thing, and people are still making real synths and real outboard gear because it does sound great and it's so much fun to use.
It is. And I just, I made a whole album, again, is one of my unfinished ones. I made a whole album about 5-6 years ago. I really got to finish this thing. And the reason I haven't is because there's this whole sci-fi concept that goes with it. And I haven't had time to completely flesh out the story.
You actually need to get abducted by aliens as part of the process?
I'm waiting for that. So, until that happens, until that happens and they give me further instructions, I guess I'm kind of like, stuck in the, I'm dead in the water with this project, right? Well, anyway, it was like right after I got the Arturia stuff, and I just made a whole album of software synth music, and I really think that it's great stuff, but I wanted to put this narrative to it because I was kind of sonically telling a story, a sci-fi story, and it's called Moot Booxlé versus the Energy Vampires.
I love it,
and but anyway, I found mixing that stuff to be a super challenge, way more challenging. And this is something I've talked about with a lot of my friends. I have a lot of friends that are composers that don't necessarily play an instrument like at any virtuoso level, but they are virtuosos with the piano roll in a DAW or in a tracker.
Right.
And they're just absolute, masterminds with the digital way of creating music. And we all talk about how hardware is just easier. There's something about it that it's easier to mix. Like the software stuff, a lot of times, I don't know what it is, man. It's just like I find a lot of times it's hard to get certain sounds to sit in a mix the same way that I could with their hardware equivalent.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm trying to think about examples. I mean, I've done both things. I find sometimes, the sound that's really cool is some synth stuff, but maybe it's the same way where we find ourselves wanting to take a synth and run it through an amp and then record that. And that feels right because it sort of
that's
analogifies it again, you know?
Yeah. Oh man, that's something I've really gotten into is reamping. So at the studio where I work, we have a big Marshall Major, an old 70s, 200 watt ginormous Marshall with a 412. And I have a reamp box coming at like just hardwired in there that I can just send anything into that. It's just all automatically ready to go. Just send it to the Marshall. So
that's
like
great.
I'm all the time just sending stuff through the Marshall. And at home I have 2 reamp boxes. And I just like one's hooked up to a JC 120 and the other one's hooked up to the Princeton. And so it's like if I want to send a Rhodes or a clavinet through there, it's just really a matter of changing a few routings in my mixer, and there you go.
Okay, cool. So how would you typically record Rhodes and Whirly on a thing? Would you just kind of go direct and then you'd let the reamp be part of more of a mix move, or would you play it through the amp in real time while you're doing the whole thing?
Well, okay, I think that depends on where it began. Like if I was playing around with an instrument through an amp and I got a tone that I like, then it's like I'm going to capture that.
Right.
But if it's just I want to put a Rhodes part on a track, I just got it direct, and if I need an amped sound, I'll either put it through Amplitube or a real amp.
Okay, cool.
And
should we be cautious if we start experimenting this and reamping? Should we be cautious? Do we run the risk of blowing up our amps by sending keyboards to them?
I've never. I have, however, blown some like bookshelf speakers. Like I had these. I had this stereo, just a home stereo with cheap 8-inch speakers, and I blew them because I had this MXR envelope filter, and I had heard this John McLaughlin track. It's him and Jack Bruce and Tony Williams. And it's called "Are You the One?" and he's playing this MXR envelope filter, and it's just like such a funky sound. I love it. And so I borrowed one from my friend, and really quickly blew some speakers.
Is that because the high frequency, or because the lows are really huge?
I think it's just the resonant peak. Yeah, like it was just like hitting it with just like these like super piercing harmonics or whatever. It was probably the lows that ended up doing it. I don't know. I've never blown any speakers though, like in an amp.
Let me ask you this. So what is your favorite synth record ever made?
The Planets by Tomita.
I love that one, dude. My roommate had that. Whoops. Yeah, I'm on. I thought I muted myself. I love that record. My roommate had that when I was living in St. Louis, and I was just blown away by it. I think I recorded it from his vinyl to cassette, and I would just go around listening to it, and what an incredible collection of sounds. Now those are all pre-DX7 kind of stuff, right?
Man, that and see, that's partly what makes the Tomita stuff so amazing, is that it was done on a modular Moog and a Mellotron and like a Rhodes piano and like a couple of other things, and the rest of it is it's, I think all the reverb was like one of those AKG big coffin like BX20 or something.
Yeah,
and which I love the sound of those big springs. Those, I think they sound so beautiful, and it's just amazing to look at the gear that he used on those records and then listen to like what he was able to do with that. Because like the one thing that people don't realize, because so few of us have had the opportunity to play an original 60s era Moog modular. So like the Moog 3C that they reissued recently, my friend has that, and he also has the System 55, which was the 70s update to the modular Moog, right? So nice. the original oscillators in the 3C, you only get about a 2.5 octave range before they start drooping in pitch and going all over the place. Like you only have about 2 to 2.5 octaves of usable in-tune notes before you have to recalibrate and retune. And that's a super limitation that I think a lot of people don't. I always like would just like get misty-eyed thinking about like how nice it would be to have a very old Moog modular until I played some very old, Moog modulars. And it's like, well, this is actually a big pain in the ass.
Right. Right. But even some of these new Behringer ones, I've heard that some of them, like when you get 2 octaves away from, the note you tuned, it's out of tune again.
Yeah, they're easy to calibrate though. Like my Pro 1, like it has gone out of calibration a couple of times and became like, I was like, at first I'm like, oh no, it's broken. And I'm like, no, there's got to be a trim pot. And so you just open it up and, trim it. And so you like play 1 octave and then you play the next one. And you just get the octave scaling to where they're in tune.
Right,
and
right. It's like setting the intonation on your guitar.
Very same thing. Yeah, you're just setting the scaling.
Nice.
Oh, so to get back to FM synthesis, that was something. So I became really obsessed with that when I was like 12, right? And I had never played a Moog synthesizer or anything, but I knew what they were because I read about Bob Moog in the encyclopedia because I was that kind of kid, I was like, there was no internet yet. And so, and as soon as there was internet, the first thing I searched was Moog. I'm looking up I was obsessed. I was like, I was so into it, and I'd go over to my friend's house that had internet and use his dot matrix printer and print out all the documents on Moogs that I could find.
Have you been up to Asheville to visit those guys?
No, I actually haven't. I haven't made it up there, and I did some promo work for them for a very brief time in 2011, and that was but I only ended up demoing 1 product for them. That was the Cluster Flux chorus.
Nice. Well, you were let's say I think you were talking about the FM.
Yeah. So that was something. So I didn't know that it was way easier to make sound than diving into menus and changing, oscillator frequencies and ratios and all this stuff. Like I didn't realize that you could just like turn a filter cutoff knob and that, so because I'd never played any of those kind of instruments before. So
right.
when
you were kind of doing it backwards.
Yeah. So it didn't seem weird or foreign or extra hard to me. It was all I knew. And I just, which made the other stuff super easy once I got into it. But as far as the FM thing, like it wasn't as daunting, I guess, because I didn't know any better.
Yeah.
And it became a thing. Like, so throughout my life, I've bought and sold so many FM synthesizers. But something happened to me. So at the end of 2020, around Christmas time, I had sent a message to my friend Karki, who he plays in a Beatles tribute band. He's the MD. He's an amazing arranger, and I had done some studio work with him. He's totally blind, and he knew Ray Charles and stuff. Like all the, I guess, blind musicians know one another. I don't know. He's got pictures on his wall of him and all these famous blind musicians, and you wouldn't even know the guy's blind though, because he's so with it. But anyway, like I had sent him some funny YouTube video or something on email just to reach out and say, hey, and he emails me back. He's like, hey, do you know anybody who might be interested in buying a couple of old DX7 2s? And I'm going to sell them. And I'm like, how much? Because at this point I didn't own any, I'd sold all my FM synths. So I was really, I think I only had like 2. And they were like the PSS series, like the home keyboards, but those are great too. And that's been my companion since I was 5, is the PSS 470. Still have it, still works great after all these years, and still looks and sounds as good as it ever did. And that 80s Yamaha stuff is built so well, built to last.
Okay,
really cool. High quality stuff. And so anyway, I ended up buying both of these DXs from this guy, and one of them had been his Rode instrument, and it was very beat up, and the other one was his studio instrument, and it was pristine. And he gave me an incredible deal on them, and it was like I took them home and started playing around with them, and all of those old feelings from when I was a little kid playing these things came back. It was like I was 12 again. And it was like the most amazing wave of nostalgia. And it ignited something in me. Like a spark went off, and now I am like, I've gone from a longtime fan of this to a total obsessive of 80s Yamaha. So I now own like 18 Yamaha keyboards.
OWC now brings you the Mini Stack STX, the world's first Thunderbolt 4 certified storage and hub expander, perfectly sized to stack with the Mac Mini, and the ideal storage and connectivity companion for Thunderbolt or USB-equipped computers and devices. With a SATA HDD SSD bay and NVMe M.2 PCIe SSD slot, you can expand your Mini's storage capacity to gigantic proportions. 3 Thunderbolt USB-C ports enable you to connect to millions of Thunderbolt, USB, and future USB 4 drives, displays, AV mixers, cameras, and tablets, as well as desktop accessories like a keyboard, card reader, or mouse. I'm using the Mini Stack STX paired with my Mac Mini M1 to house my dedicated audio SSD and sample libraries at my studio, and it works great. Find the new Mini Stack STX and all your storage needs at macsales.com/rockstars. 50 years ago, William G. Dilley introduced the world to his revolutionary new dynamics processor, the Model 610 Comp Limiter. A truly unique device, the Model 610 was not only the fastest, cleanest, and quietest of its type, but was also capable of providing completely separate peak limiting and compression functions. Today, Spectra 1964 introduces the Model C610 Comp Limiter, described as the most versatile piece of audio gear you can buy. Great for adding control and power to everything from vocals, guitars, and bass to mixing and even mastering, the C610 gives you the same massive sound that rocked legendary studios like Stax, Ardent, Advision, A&M, and Record Plant. I'm using the C610 on every record I make at the Toy Box Studio, and you should too. You'll love it. Go to Spectra1964.com or call 801-797-0642. I've seen some in your videos, and they look like these little ones that you wouldn't think twice about, and then there you are playing these incredible musical parts on them.
Thank you. And see, that's so like I like all of all of them, from the home keyboards. Like I have the 2 original home keyboards that they made, the PS2 and PS3. Although I still haven't figured out how to play GTA on them, but
nice.
Sorry, bad joke. But anyway, it's like, those were made in like 1980, and those are still analog. It's basically like having a Bon Tempe organ or one of those like home like Lowry organs or something.
Yeah. In
a tiny package. Like these are definitely high quality, professional quality instruments, but they were aimed at beginners.
That's cool.
Yeah, and so that stuff just stands the test of time. And so I've got all the stuff. I've got the wind controllers. I've got the foot controllers. I've got all the MIDI accessories. I've got all the rack reverbs. I've got the DMP7 mixers, the first digital mixers that they made in like '87. That's
fun, man. That's some cool stuff. So you have some good examples of that stuff on your YouTube channel, right?
Yeah, and there's going to be a lot more. I have a ton more. I'm in a situation now where I really don't get a whole lot of time in my home studio. So I really only get to spend like maybe a day a week in there.
And do you have a name do you have something you like to call your home studio? Do you have a name for the studio?
It's always just been Moot Booxlay Studios.
All right. And you said you're working in a pro studio down there as well.
Mm-hmm. I work in a place called Soundcheck Studios in Fort Myers. It's been in business since '77.
Oh, that's great, man. I think there's some videos of you playing drums there and doing other things.
A bunch, yeah. My Instagram has a ton of videos from there.
Okay, cool. Yeah. And it seems like a place that's still got some good wood paneling on the walls and things like that. Or
Lord, this place hasn't changed. It hasn't changed at one iota since probably 1982. Like,
That's
it's
fantastic.
we got an MCI 24 track in there with old soundtracks console. All the same old outboard gear and everything. And all the gear in there is old. The whole place is just old, and it just feels like old. But we run Logic,
Yeah.
and we actually do a lot of hip hop there, which is not. I mean, I love hip hop music, but I haven't really been a bit fan of what has happened in like the last 10 years. But I produce a lot of it just for work, and there's a few artists that I work with that I really enjoy working with, just as people, even if it's not really my genre.
Well, I mean, old school and new school hip hop are quite different in certain ways.
Well,
I mean, old school began with sampling real players playing funky grooves and stuff like that, and new school might be more 808s and rapid fire hi-hats and that whole kind of trap production.
Well, this is going to be my okay boomer moment right here, but I'm well, I mean, what I'm saying is that everybody's going to be calling me okay boomer,
right?
Because I'm going to say that I feel like this is my get off the lawn. Like, I don't understand the whole obsession with this trap beat, that it's the same 808 patterns, the exact same sounds, always the tuned 808 kick for the kick. Usually it's the same rhythmic pattern with a different set of very fast repeated, triplets and whatever on top, right? Just lots of 808 hi-hat that takes your head off, lots of kick that gives you diarrhea, and 4-bar loops with some sound that just repeats over and over. It doesn't go anywhere. There's no bridge. There's no nothing. It's the most basic, lazy, formulaic music, the most dumbed down music ever. And that, if that makes me an old guy for saying that, I feel like a lot of these people, I mean, I'm not criticizing anybody that likes that or makes that stuff. I just feel like it's a lack of context. And a lot of younger people that are into this, they don't have the experience of going into a studio and doing a whole session and watching how, each instrument gets put down and mixed and mastered. And, I feel like it would be something that people could appreciate more if they were privy to that.
Yeah, I think there's a exposure to music that needs to happen for each of us to, have an appreciation of the style of music grow. So because we were exposed to music with artists and bands playing, or jazz or funk or rock and roll, classic rock, any of that, we grow an appreciation for that. And I've thought a bit about, the bass music and the whole movement of it. And in exploring it a little bit myself, out of curiosity too, I think I'm discovering that part of it is the fact that it's almost like a new style of music and instrumentation being developed that will play this new instrument that is the massive stereo with huge subwoofers, whether it's, primarily in a car or anywhere where, you kind of need that giant bass, simplified bass pattern so that you can play that sound and get that hugeness out of the stereo. That's my theory for now anyway.
Well, I think I'm not saying that I don't like that sound. I think that it's cool. And, I've made a lot of tracks that I'm very proud of, sonically and even musically. It's just that I feel like there's so much sameness, Yeah.
There's more room to explore that's not being explored yet. Musically.
You got it. And I think that, there are people, it's not like it isn't being done. It's just not being done in the mainstream. I think, that this whole thing is going to be explored, every nook and cranny of it. Just like every other type of electronic music has been pretty much deconstructed and reconstructed,
Are you a fan of EDM music at all?
And see, it's funny, like I'm sort of in this electronic world, and that's the kind of circles that I run in, so to speak, and that's where I'm known a lot. But I'm not really.
Right.
Like
no,
some of
fine.
it, like some of it I do. I mean, it's the same thing. It's just like there's like 20% of it that I find enjoyable, and the rest of it I find just too formulaic, and predictable.
It's also that difference between playing the parts and programming the parts. There's a real different those kind of go in different directions a lot of times.
Yeah, when I hear some kind of loop-based music that is like, it's a 15 to 20 minute track and the drums literally, like I bought a Richie Hawtin record, right? Richie Hawtin, one of like pioneer of electronic dance music. Mm-hmm. And I don't remember which one it was, but it was like I set the needle on it and it's this 808 pattern or a 909 pattern. And I'm like, okay, this is cool. This is going to develop into something. I'm liking this. Move the needle a minute in. Same thing. Move the middle, keep moving the needle and it doesn't change. It's the same loop. Like it's literally like me getting a sound check in the studio, turning on a drum machine to make us. It's like, where's the music?
Yeah. Well,
I'm
when
just
I think
listening
about
to a drum machine play.
When I think about, like let's take that Behringer Pro 1 for a moment and just imagine you're making a demo of it and you're doing a sequenced sound, sequenced loops, so that kind of thing or whatever. And then the first thing you do with the synth is you start grabbing the knobs and you start morphing that sound over time. And that to me is where you get that nice cross section between something that's repetitive and something that's evolving over time and taking you to new places. And that can happen.
It's a textural approach.
Yeah.
More than a
Yeah. And a lot of times I've found myself in the studio trying to add a part or a sound to something. And I'm like, this is a cool harmonically, this is a good choice for this part. But it just needs to evolve over time, over the course of the verse or over the chorus, and it needs to modulate. And that's where, modulation can come in really helpful. But, again, it's like that difference between things that happen in the box and in Pro Tools. We have a tendency to look for a set it and forget it approach. Whereas when you use manual synthesizers, old analog synths and stuff, it's hands-on. You're going to do it one time and you better have been in a record.
Especially if it was modular, good luck getting that exact patch again. Especially if it was, you see some people on doing live modular sets and I'm just like, it's my goodness. Like I can't make heads or tails of anything they're doing because it's like, there are like, 60 patch cables plugged in and it looks like spaghetti but they know what they're doing because they made the patch. And I find that when, I'll make a complex patch like at a trade show or something, and even other people who are really good synthesists come over to the booth and where I'm demoing and like, they can't make heads or tails of it because it's like, it's just like you go into somebody else's studio and you don't know how they have things routed. Yeah.
Becomes personalized.
It's very personal, and that's one of the things I love about synthesizers is that there are an infinite number of ways that you can play them and approach them and make music with them, and none of it's bad or wrong. It's like it's all, if you're having fun and you're getting enjoyment out of it, then it's worthwhile.
This episode is sponsored by Recording Studio Rockstars Academy. Are you ready to take your recording, mixing, and mastering to the next level and make your best record ever? Then visit the Academy to find the course that's right for you. Want to record killer drums in your studio? Then check out Rockstars of Drums to learn how to record, edit, and mix pro-sounding drums with a professional Nashville session drummer in a Grammy-winning studio. Or if you're ready to start mastering your own records at home, then check out Rockstars of Mastering, where I walk you through exactly how I mastered my own record, Skadoosh, the soundtrack to this podcast, in fact, using nothing but plugins in PreSonus Studio One. These techniques would work for you no matter what DAW you're using right now. And if mixing is your focus, then check out my free course, Mix Master Bundle, where I show you how to mix using stock and free plugins in Pro Tools. Plus, you get a look at how I recorded everything in my studio and multi-track downloads to practice your mixing and even include in your mix portfolio if you want. Are you ready to make your best record ever? Then go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started now, or look for the clickable link in the show notes of this episode. Well, so we're coming up on our close here, but let me jump away from synths for a minute and let me talk about recording something else that is your passion, which is drums. So on Step by Step Detour, on your record by Moot Booxlé, that one just sounds like Steely Dan, man. It's a great groovy track. Tell us the story behind that, and talk a little bit about some of your favorite ways to record drums.
Okay. Well, yeah. So that Step by Step thing was actually, so all of those tunes on that album, on Step Inside My Mind, like a lot of times it would be a longer session. Like most of my stuff will start out as a longer session that gets edited down. And so that was a piece that was just at the tail end of something else. And it was like, I kind of made it its own standalone piece. And so, started out with Rhodes, and then I played the exact same part on piano because I wanted to have that super, it's kind of a Steely Dan thing to layer acoustic and electric piano together.
And would that start with a click as a guide or anything like that? Any kind of tempo guide?
Yeah, I think I had a drum loop or something going. There was definitely a click if there wasn't a loop. There was.
Do you prefer why would you do a loop versus a click as a starting guide for creating a song?
Well, especially if I don't know what the song is, like what we were talking about earlier about just kind of just hitting record and letting it fly and then see what happens. Like if I don't have a preconceived notion of what the song's even going to be, I'll let a sort of drum loop or something be my jumping off point, something that kind of gives me a creative impetus,
Mm-hmm.
And it's just a lot more pleasant to listen to than.
Right. There's no pocket to a click. It doesn't guide you towards a certain part of the groove.
Yeah. Yeah, and sometimes sometimes you need some kind of a rhythmic safety net if you're doing improvisational stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
Because you don't want to have to also having to be conscious of keeping a steady pulse while you're in this subconscious headspace.
Mm-hmm.
It's just again, it takes you out of the moment, and now you're in your head, and it's. Yeah, so as a help. So
how would you have mic'd up the drums on Step by Step?
Yeah, so getting back to the drum miking. So at the time, I think on that album, okay, so that's a Gretsch kit. That's a Gretsch Renown. And at the time I didn't have as many keyboards, so I had more room for drums in the studio. So it was like a 9-piece setup that I had. It was float with rototoms and
nice.
And everything.
Go, Dave Weckl.
Oh yeah, man! I was going, the master plan. I was going for the whole, just Neil Peart,
Yep.
huge kit and 2 hi-hats, everything, lots of stuff. And so that album was done like that, and that's when I still was using resonant heads on the drums. I've since gone completely concert tom with everything. I cut out the bottom heads.
Nice.
And, single-headed kick, everything. I'm real into that 70s concert tom, Phil Collins type of sound. But at the time I was having, I had this Gretsch set, kind of in a more, because I was also recording a lot more modern style music. And so I kind of needed it to be a little bit more contemporary sounding. But I was using a pair of AKG C414 XL2s for overheads.
Okay.
And I don't even think I had a hi-hat mic on there at the time.
Would you just space those 414s out, just spaced out, cardioid looking down at the kit?
Yep. And I try to make a V shape, and center it around the kick drum, because that's something Daryl taught me. It was to make sure your stereo image is not skewed, so that
right.
The kick is centered in the overheads kind of. And so those are the overheads, 57s on all the drums, and then some cheap Samson kick mic, not even a really crappy kick mic, but just with enough EQ and stuff, it was okay.
Yeah.
I recently got this Behringer knockoff of the Shure Beta 91.
Oh, really?
It's the boundary condenser.
Mm-hmm.
And man, oh man, I turned my EQ off. Like, I put that thing in the kit because it already has like a little bump. There's a dip switch on the bottom that you can, like, you know, have it flat or have a little scoop in the low mids. And I just sat that inside the kick drum on a pillow. This is just in the last like week that I've discovered this thing. I never knew my kick could sound so great, man. I just I don't have to use any EQ at all. It just sounds great.
Right. So that's a boundary mic. I'm sort of blanking on the name, but like a PZM mic. Where you typically went, like, you could attach it to the wall, but I haven't done that in ages. But I remember seeing somebody lay one of those on the pillow inside a kick drum, and that was a cool kick sound.
Man, it's like got so much low end, and it's it's nice. Like, it might not be the most, you know, universally applicable sound, but I think that it captures the way my kick actually sounds the best of any mic I've used so far. Yeah, I like it even better than a D112.
We love stuff like that on Recording Studio Rockstars, because for me, it's like I hear about a cool thing and it's like groovy. I'm just going to try that on the next thing I record and see if I dig it, you know?
I think that's the best way, you know. It's just like, you know, you get a new piece of gear, you get a new, you know, outboard preamp or a new mic or something, then it's time to because that's the only way it ever becomes integrated into your process, is to experiment with it and find where it applies. That's awesome, dude. Well, we are coming to the end of our time, and man, I'm thrilled to have you here on the show. This is so cool to meet you and just hang out and hear you talking about stuff. And thank you. I just
gratitude to you and to the Rockstars for allowing me to just, like, you know, keep turning you. I feel like, you know, like you started talking about something, then I just grab you by the shoulders and you turn you over to the left, and then grab you by the shoulders, turn you over to the right.
Well, there's so much to say, you know, that's the thing, is there's just so much to say. And there's, like, you know, there are probably 10 more bullet points on each topic that I could have said, but that's, you know, it's a big world. Well, let me take you in the Wayback Studio machine, and we're going to go back in time for my closing question. And you're going to go back and find young Matthew, who's sitting at the drums at age 16. And, you know, the cast of Grease is just about to get up on stage, and you say, listen, young Matthew. And then young Matthew says, shh, the show's about to start. But you're like, no, I've come back in time to give you this one bit of advice. Here's the single most important thing you need to know to be a rock star of the recording studio yourself one day. What advice would you go back and give yourself if you could? Few things. One, don't wait for the coronation day. It ain't going to happen. You got to go out and get it. Okay. And and two, don't go hat in hand trying to solicit work. Do great things, put yourself out there, let people see what you do, and they will come to you. That's everything good. That I've ever tried to go after, like when Korg came out with the Odyssey, like I was like hounding them, trying to get a demo job, you know, and like they didn't give me the time of day. But then other people that I didn't even know came out of the woodwork and asked me to do it. And anything cool that I've ever done has happened organically like that. It wasn't because I was like chasing it. It came to me because I was just putting myself out there, showing my stuff. And I feel like if your work is strong, it speaks for itself. You mean like weird podcast hosts messaging you after watching your YouTube video? Yes, exactly like that. But awesome. Yeah, that's it. You know, it's just like, it's not going to happen. You know, there's got to be work put in. It's not going to just magically, you're not going to just magically get some kind of setup in life because you're talented. Yeah. You know, it's unfortunately not a meritocracy, you know? Well, it's the put yourself out there. And I mean, for me, a version of that, probably the biggest version I've ever done has been this podcast. You know, I just decided to do a thing, and now it's been 7 years. Good Lord. Wow. Yeah. And you know, we're approaching 400 episodes. And it's, you know, man, I've been missing out. It's connecting with so many cool people like yourself. So that's a good tip, man. Well, dude, thank you so much for hanging with us on the show. Please let the rock stars know where would you like them to go to check out your work and connect with you? What if they're ready to make their next hit record with you? What should they do? Okay, if you just search on pretty much any social media, Moot Booxlé, that's MootBooxle. That's so I'm on Instagram as that, all the different platforms, on YouTube, Moot Booxlé, and of course my albums are at mootbooxlé.bandcamp.com. I push the Bandcamp thing a lot more than any other way to deliver my music, because that one pays. People actually buy records.
Let's make sure we'll make sure we got that in the show notes as well, so people can click through and check it out.
Excellent.
Well, very cool. Well, Moot, it's been a blast, dude. I look forward to meeting you in person.
Thank you so much, Lidge.
And
Likewise, man.
You know what I'm going to do when I take a break? I'm just going to go watch you do more synth videos, because that's my new that's my new addiction.
Oh man, well, I sure appreciate it, and thank you so much for this opportunity to speak with you, and for all of the kind words, and thank you.
It's our pleasure, man. Thanks for listening in, Rockstars, and Moot. We'll see you guys in the studio. Cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. And if you want more free content from Recording Studio Rockstars, all you have to do is go to rsrockstars.com/email. Again, that's rsrockstars.com/email to enter your name and email, and I'll keep you in the loop with articles, videos, podcast updates, and even free gear giveaways for your studio. Just look for the link in the show notes below. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lidge Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music. Recording Studio Rockstars would like to give a big thank you to our amazing sponsors who helped make this episode possible. API, OWC, Spectra 1964, Sampley, SonarWorks, and Isotope. Remember to use the coupon codes ROCK10 at isotope.com/rockstars for 10% off any plugin purchase, or start your extended 30-day free trial subscription to get access to lots of their plugins. And sign up for your free account with 2 projects now at sampley.app, or use the coupon code RSR20 to get 20% off the first 3 months. And don't forget to use the coupon code ROCKSTAR for 10% off any course at Recording Studio Rockstars Academy for a limited time. You'll find links to all these wonderful sponsors in the description of the podcast. These are all things I highly recommend for your studio. They're going to help you make your best record ever. I would also like to give a big thank you to our fantastic team here at Recording Studio Rockstars: Vlad Weselchenko, Braden Stremming, and John Richardson for additional podcast and video production. Thanks, guys. And thanks so much for listening, Rockstars. We'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.